Good evening, ThinkScript Scholars. I've had several of you ask me how to learn ThinkScript, and there are certainly some resources online that I would recommend. Uh, and I also decided that maybe I could do a few videos here and there to at least let you know how I problem solve when I'm using ThinkScript. Now, let me tell you up front that I'm not a professional programmer. I have very little programming education. I have done some programming in the past for um, a side job, but that was really just something that I took up on my own and nothing that I really had specific training in. So, with that said, let's talk a little bit about the areas that you can look at on the internet. I'm going to bring this over here and make it full screen for now. Certainly one of the good resources I've found is this Thinkorswim Learning Center at tlc.thinkorswim.com. And you'll get this page up like this, and it's not real easy to find to start with. But if you'll go down here to the bottom and find this section on the Think Manual and the ThinkScript tutorials, these tutorials are a very good way to get started with ThinkScript. And I would suggest you read through them and try to understand them. There's also some of these appendices are quite helpful as regards working through custom study hints and some of the more advanced things that can be done with these. Then if you'll go to the reference and look under the reserved words to start with, you'll get a whole list of items over here. And when you click on a particular reserved word, for instance, it will tell you what that reserved word means or how it's used. And when you click on the various functions, you can move down into them. And for the instance, this one shows you the use of the close command as a function. And it tells you the parameters that get passed to it, etc. So I found this to be a very good site for beginners. And I reference it myself frequently when I'm writing code. So we're going to move on now to our chore of the day, or what I've decided to choose to do, which is to draw a line on a chart. Now, I realize that we have a drawing line down here that you can just choose and draw from here to say here, that would be the high close to today's close. And you really don't need any code to do that. However, I think it's instructive to work through the problem of how to do this in code so that we can learn how to deal with ThinkScript. One thing we need to understand when we start writing code in ThinkScript is that the code, when it executes, will start here on the left side of the chart and will move across candle by candle, reiterating each time to see what the value should be at that candle based on whatever parameters or functions we have included within our study or code. So let's go and see what we can do about writing this code. So we would click on this flask up here and open Edit Studies and Strategies. And what we want to do is create a new study. Now this will come up by default with this new study 0. If you haven't cleaned these up, it'll be new study 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And this plot data equals close is just the default that they put in there to have something there. We're going to clean that up. And I have written this code ahead of time, and I'm going to bring it over a little bit at a time so that we can work through this a line or so at a time. Now, when I write code, I always start with some sort of a header. In this case, it's a very simple header. It starts with this hashtag or pound sign, and what I've named this program or this set of code is going to be ThinkScript Scholar, TSS, high close to close. So we're going to draw the same line programmatically that I just drew by using the drawing tool down here on the chart. So let's take this and name our study to match that. Now I like to have this separately here because other people may come and name this something different, or you yourself may end up naming this something different, and you can always have this as a reference to what this really was meant to be to start with. Many of my headers also have additional lines below them. Now, this line is actually just to use it as an example here. I like to use the add chart bubble function to help me decode or kind of find the glitches and bugs when I'm having a hard time following what variables or what's happening to the variables as I move across the chart at time of execution. So this will help me with that a lot. So in this example, we're going to use the add chart bubble function, which is past these various parameters. This first parameter tells add chart bubble on what bar do I show this bubble. This parameter says when I'm at this aforementioned bar, what value do I place the chart bubble at? In other words, what price level, or in some cases percentage, do I place this at? The next parameter that's passed is what value do you want me to display in this bubble? And in this case, we're just going to number the bars from left to right across the chart. We've decided that this bubble will be a white bubble, and the yes at the end indicates that the bubble will be above or just above this price level that we've shown here. So we're going to go ahead and run this. I see my window's a little too wide. There we go. We'll make it work. I'm going to bring this back over that way a little bit. Okay, let's just go ahead and apply that and see what happens. So now we have these bubbles all across the chart, and I realize that they're kind of slathered on top of each other here, but you can tell in general that you're starting with one over here and you're counting all the way to the end. And so that little line of code basically executes the bar number function for each bar, and it prints that number just above the high on each bar. So we can see that in the end we have 253 bars, and the high bar was bar number 192. Now we can start to realize that this is going to be instructive because we know that we will need to know the difference between these two bars, how many bars there are that intervene between the high bar and the close. Remember, we are currently looking at a 1 year, 1 day chart, but you may be looking at a 3 month or a 6 month, 1 day chart. And so the number of bars on the chart to the left will be different. The high point will be different for each underlying, and the distance between the high point to the close will be different. So we need a way that we can capture this number in this number, as well as what the value of the close is here, and the value of the close here is here on the final candle. Now, remember that I said that when ThinkScript executes, it generally runs from left to right, and as it approaches from the left here, let's go back out and zoom out to our entire chart. As it approaches from the left here, it's not going to know in any of these candles how many candles are actually on the chart until it gets to that last candle. So unfortunately, in this form, you would not have this number 253 to reference when you needed to do calculations back in this area. Again, the same thing happens for the close. This closing price will not be known to ThinkScript until it actually executes all the way across the chart and gets to this final candle. But there is a way around this, and we're going to discuss that next. Let's go back in. We'll look at our little two-line program, one of which doesn't actually even execute, because when you put this hashtag or pound sign in front, that really tells the program when it's executing, it tells ThinkScript, don't do anything with this line. This is just a line for the programmer to put their notes on, and you're not to do anything with this. Ignore this line. So we really have a one-line program as far as anything that is actually executed. So I'm going to leave that there for now, but we'll probably be taking it off shortly because I will want to do some other things with these chart bubbles. And I'm using these chart bubbles a lot more here than I would in real life because, as I said, I often just am using them to help me sort out a problem that I'm having a hard time visualizing. I'll just go ahead and take that off, I think. Okay, so now remember that the first thing we need to do is figure out how many bars there are on the chart. So to do this, we're going to use the fold command. Now the fold command is very much like a for next loop, but the way it's set up is somewhat obtuse, I believe, and I'm actually using a very simple form of the fold command here. I'm not going to try to explain the entire fold command during this video, but what I will do is try to explain what we're doing with this particular line. So we take a variable called final bar and we're going to define it. So we define final bar equals to this. The fold command says count forward from 0 to 252 as long as this part of the statement is true, and as long as that is true, then do this. Okay, so what has to be true? Let's look at this. First, we have a close value, and we have an indexing value, which was set back here by b equals 0 to 252. Now, I'm going to take a time out just a minute from this discussion to discuss indexing very briefly. In general, in ThinkScript, when we index, we use these square brackets as is shown here. And in this instance, we have defined close 3 bars to the left equal to close in these square brackets with the numeral 3. In the next line, we define close 3 bars to the right equals close in square brackets with the negative numeral 3. So remember that positive numbers look back to your left to get a value, and negative numbers look to your right, this number of bars, to get a value. So if we were on bar number 7 and we had this in our code, bar number 7 would return the close from 3 bars ago, which would be bar number 4. Again, if we had this in our code, bar number 7 would be returning the value of the close on bar 10. So this is a similar function up here, but we don't use the brackets. The get value function has us separate what it is we're looking for from the index with a comma. I'm going to remove these now since we've talked about indexing a little bit. And let's look back up to what this is doing. So basically it says get the close value so many bars to the right. And then we have this is nan or is not a number function. So the is not a number function by itself means if this is not a number, then isNaN will return true. If this is a number, isNaN will return false. Now you will notice that we also have an exclamation point in front of this. The exclamation point means basically not. It's the opposite of whatever the rest of this means. So this is sort of like a double negative in grammar. So what we're saying here is while close is not a value, do this. Another way to say that, just as you would in grammar, is while close is a value, do this. Really what you're telling the program here is that I want you to go forward as far as 252 bars. If you get to 252, stop. If you get to a value where close is not actually a value but is null, then stop. Otherwise, I want you to find the result of this function and return it to final bar, and return it each time you iterate or move up or step up your number by one here. So what we're doing is going out and getting the bar number as long as close is actually a value. So we will go out and tell the program to get the value of the bar number, the same number of indexed offset bars to the right as we used here. So let's add this little debug line, and we'll make it active by taking off the little hashtag that was in front of it. And let's see what happens to the number of the final bar. Okay, note that every one of these bubbles now has 253 in it, because that is the number of the final bar. But unlike the situation we had before, that number is known even back here. Now you'll notice that the very first bar is 252, and there's a reason for that, because remember, we started at 0. And let's go back to our code. We will be throwing out this value eventually anyway, so that doesn't matter. I'll show you this as we proceed through this, that first bar is going to be nullified because we have to use it to initiate or initialize our variables as we go forward. Okay. Now let me find the next thing we need to do. The next thing we need is to get the final close. We've gotten the final bar. We're going to remove this now, and we'll add this line in. Now we look here for whatever the final closing value is, and it's essentially exactly the same process as we use for finding the final bar, but now we're actually returning the close value rather than the bar number. Again, if we read through this, what we're saying is define the variable final close equal to fold, starting with C equals 0 to 252, and stop at 252, or you stop while close is still a value. Excuse me. You stop when close is no longer a valid value. So we have that line in, and let's see what our final value is. So all of these show us that we are carrying back the value to 8216. Making you folks dizzy there, probably doing that. Let me back out to this. 8216, and that value then is known all the way through. Now the values we don't have are the peak value and the bar number that the peak or high value top price close occurs at, and we're going to take that on next. Now this takes a little different form. We don't use the fold value or the fold command here. We will use the HighestAllClose function. So HighestAll takes the highest value of whatever it is you put in the parentheses. In this case, we want the highest close that's available on the chart. And we will say that that is the top price. We then find the top price bar by initializing the value, stating that if the bar number equals 1, then top price bar is double nan, or in other words, is set to null. Else, if it's not bar number 1, if the top price equals the close, so if this top price, the highest close on the chart, equals this particular close on this bar, then we're going to take that bar number and assign it back to the top price bar. If neither of those are true, then we're going to carry forward the value from the prior top price bar. So you take the top price bar that occurred on the prior bar, and you reference that by this indexing in square brackets, looking back 1 bar. So now we're going to look and see if we can find out what the peak bar was. Well, apparently not, because I need to take that off. Okay. And it looks like I have a variable that I didn't get changed, so we'll take care of that. We could do this with top price as well. And in fact, I can tell you what, let's do both. We'll do top price plus, this is concatenating. We'll just use the bar like that. If I could type, I'd be dangerous. And now we get to see the price and the bar number that is here. All right. Now we're starting to get the information together that we need to be able to draw this line. The next thing we need to do is remember that slope equals rise divided by run. It's not going to like that command. I'll put a little notation in here. Slope equals rise times run. So next, we're going to figure out what our rise is and what our run is. In other words, first we calculate the difference between the high price and the closing price, and then we calculate the difference between the final bar and the bar that has the highest closing price. So that's what these two lines of code do. Rise equals top price minus final close, and run equals final bar minus top price bar. Now there's a little error checking that we'll need to do before we can actually plot the slope. And that error checking is to make sure we're not dividing by 0. So I've defined here indeterminate slope equals if run equals 0, then yes, else no. So we are assigning true or false values essentially to the indeterminate slope, and it would be considered indeterminate if the run is 0. Now let's think for a minute, when would the run be 0? Well, the only time that the run would be 0 is if the highest top price for the close was the final bar of the chart on the far right. Now we can go ahead and define our slope. Slope equals, if this is not an indeterminate slope, then rise over run, else it's a null value. All right. Our next two lines of code will define the actual line and then plot the line. Now the reason you have to do these separately is because the definition of the line has a reference back to itself right here. That's called recursion. It's taking a prior value of itself and reassigning, much as we did up here with the top price bar, where we recursively look back one bar to bring the prior bar's value of top price bar forward. So in this case, we're saying that the line, if it's equal to bar number equal 1, then assign a null value, a double, not a number value. This is a constant that is used in ThinkScript. There are other constants as well, but this is one that is used quite frequently. Now realize that this is the part of the programming that negates any value on that first bar. If in fact the first bar were the highest bar, this program would miss that, because we're negating the first bar, saying that that's a null value, regardless of if it could be the highest bar, but we're saying it's a null value. So accepting that little part of the program that you may not feel comfortable with, this will work well, but you just have to understand that the limit is that if the high occurs on that first bar, this program will be looking for the next or the second highest close, not the highest close. So now we're saying if it's not the first bar, and if the bar number equals the top price bar, then we want to set this line, the beginning of this line, to the top price. If it's not the first bar, and it's some number after this bar number is the same as the top price bar, then we don't do the top price anymore, because this is not equal anymore. It would go to this else part of the statement, which now assigns line 1. That means line 1 indexed 1 value back from the prior bar minus the slope. So in other words, to start with, we assign the line the top price. In the next candle, we look back and say, oh, what was the line 1 candle ago? Oh, it was the top price. So we're going to take that top price and we're going to select, we're going to subtract the slope from that value for the next candle. And on the third candle, after we've hit the top price bar, this will now be a lesser number than this, but we will still come and look back and see what was on the second candle after the top price bar, and we will subtract the slope from that, and this will be iterated until we get to the final bar. So now we're going to take this line that we've defined and plot it. Again, you have to do this because you cannot plot an iterative statement. We're also going to take and paint this the way we want to, so it looks the way we want. I'm going to just take that out. And we'll say we're identify the plot as draw line, and what we're telling the program is the plot draw line, we want to paint it, set the painting strategy, and the painting strategy will be set to points. We will again tell ThinkScript that we want draw line to set a line weight of 5. So you can set from 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and this will be the heaviest weight so that we can see it easily since we're just using points. Okay. I think that should do it. Let's select OK here, and voila, there's our line of points that goes from the highest close to today's close. And we would just go in here and click on that and remove that drawing so that we can just see our line. So I'm going to go back to this code and leave it on the screen for just a minute. And that is the code that helps us draw a line from the highest point on the chart to the final close on the chart. Thank you very much. I hope this was instructive.